The Christmas Eve Catastrophe. Okay, so for the first story, we rewind back to 1998. Christmas Eve, 6 p.m. at Disneyland in Anaheim, California, to be exact. The sailing ship Columbia, a massive multi-ton replica of an 18th century vessel, was docking after its final voyage of the day. On the dock, 33-year-old Luan Phi Dawson was waiting with his wife, ready to continue their holiday celebration. A cast member on the dock grabbed the mooring rope to secure the ship, wrapping it around a heavy cast iron cleat bolted into the dock. But the cast member pulled too hard. The metal cleat, weakened by years of corrosion and inadequate maintenance, sheared off its bolts. It became a projectile. The 8-inch piece of cast iron flew through the air at high speed, striking Luan Dawson directly in the head. The impact was so severe that it caused massive blunt force trauma, crushing his skull and torso. He was killed instantly, collapsing in front of his wife. Bro, if one hair on my head knew that a piece of the dock was about to go airborne, I'd be in another zip code. But the horror wasn't over. The same metal cleat ricocheted off Luan and struck his wife in the face, shattering her cheekbones, nose, and eye socket, causing permanent facial disfigurement. The cast member who had pulled the rope was also injured by the flying debris. 3 victims from a single catastrophic failure. Children were crying, parents were covering their eyes. The ship just sat there, motionless, as paramedics worked on the victims. An investigation by OSHA later revealed that Disney's maintenance and safety procedures were woefully inadequate. The bolts on the cleat were corroded, and the docking procedures were improper. The Dawson family filed a wrongful death lawsuit, detailing Luan's instant death, his wife's permanent disfigurement, and the emotional trauma of it all. Disney, facing a mountain of evidence of their own negligence, settled for an undisclosed but undoubtedly massive sum. The incident forced a complete overhaul of the park's safety protocols. All the dock cleats were replaced, and docking procedures were completely rewritten. But for the Dawson family, the damage was done. Luan's wife would spend years undergoing reconstructive surgery, a permanent, painful reminder of the day the happiest place on Earth became the site of a Christmas Eve tragedy. The Matterhorn's second victim. All right, next up, we're heading to a Disneyland classic, the Matterhorn bobsleds. It's a high-speed coaster that sends you careening through the icy caverns of a man-made mountain. On June 3rd, 1984, 48-year-old Dolly Young was on that ride with her family. At some point during the ride's sharp turns and sudden drops, she was ejected from her bobsled. Dolly landed on the track, likely dazed and injured, but she had no time to react. The bobsled directly behind her, traveling at nearly 30 miles per hour, struck her with incredible force. The impact crushed her skull and torso, killing her instantly. But the horror didn't end there. The bobsled that hit her became trapped on top of her body, pinning her to the track. The ride's safety system kicked in, stopping every bobsled in the mountain, leaving the passengers in the car that struck her sitting directly above her crushed remains. Rescue crews had to evacuate the entire ride before they could even get to Dolly. They had to carefully lift the bobsled off her body before she could be pronounced dead. The incident was a horrifying echo of a death that had happened 20 years earlier, in 1964, when a 15-year-old boy named Mark Maples was also ejected from the ride and killed. The fact that it took 2 deaths, 2 decades apart, for Disney to finally install adequate safety restraints on the Matterhorn is just insane. The image of a bobsled, stopped in the dark with a crushed body pinned beneath it, is a grim reminder that sometimes the magic is just a thin veneer over corporate negligence. The slow death on the Jungle Cruise. This next one, is just infuriating. On August 22nd, 2021, 66-year-old Joanne Aguilar, who used a wheelchair, wanted to ride the Jungle Cruise with her daughters. The wheelchair-accessible boats weren't available, but cast members told her it was fine. They'd help her onto a regular boat. They did. She enjoyed the 8-minute ride, at the skipper's terrible jokes. But when she tried to get off the boat, she fell, and her leg snapped. A clean break of the femur. Now, a broken leg is bad, but what happened next, according to the lawsuit filed by her daughters, is what makes this one of the worst. As Joanne lay on the dock in excruciating pain, the cast members allegedly laughed. They stood around and laughed at an injured 66-year-old woman. It took several minutes for them to even call for paramedics. That fall started a 5-month-long nightmare. Joanne had surgery to pin her femur, but the wound got infected. The infection spread to the bone, a condition called osteomyelitis, which is notoriously difficult to treat. She spent months in a rehab center, in constant pain, unable to walk. The infection then spread to her bloodstream, causing sepsis. Her organs began to fail. On January 29, 2022, 5 months after that fall, Joanne Aguilar died of septic shock. Her daughters filed a wrongful death lawsuit, and Disney's response? They denied everything. In court filings, they claimed they weren't at fault and that Aguilar's injuries were due to her own negligence. They are actually trying to blame the victim. The lawsuit is still ongoing, but the fact remains. A woman died a slow, agonizing death that started with a broken leg that should never have happened in the first place. All because Disney employees couldn't be bothered to wait for a wheelchair-accessible boat, and then allegedly found it funny when their negligence caused a woman to get seriously hurt. It's a level of corporate indifference that frankly, is just gross. The Monorail Skin-Scraper. Okay, let's rewind to the swinging 60s. It's grad night at Disneyland in Anaheim, California, June 1966. The park is buzzing with teenagers celebrating the end of high school. But 19-year-old Thomas Cleveland wasn't a graduate. He was just a guy trying to sneak into the park for the party. And he had a really, really bad plan. Instead of, buying a ticket, Thomas decided to climb the 16-foot-high chain-link fence and get onto the monorail track. The monorail, the sleek, silent highway in the sky, was the first of its kind in the Western Hemisphere, gliding on a concrete beam 20 feet above the ground. Thomas figured he could just walk the beam into the park. A security guard spotted him from a tower and yelled at him to get down. Thomas, realizing he was caught, started to jump. But it was too late. The monorail, nearly silent and traveling at 15 to 20 miles per hour, was already upon him. He was struck by the train and wedged underneath it. The operator didn't even know he'd hit anything. The monorail kept going, dragging Thomas along the track for about 40 feet. Now, 40 feet doesn't sound that far until you realize the track is basically a giant concrete cheese grater. By the time the train was stopped, most of his skin had been scraped from his body. Yeah, he was, for all intents and purposes, flayed alive. When the emergency crews arrived, they found a scene so gruesome it was hard to comprehend. Thomas was still alive, but just barely. His body was so mangled, with his skull crushed and bones broken, that he was pronounced dead at the scene. The image of his body, wedged under the monorail 20 feet in the air with a 40-foot blood trail behind it, haunted rescue workers for years. In the aftermath, Disney increased security around the monorail track, adding more fencing and warning signs. But for Thomas Cleveland, it was a brutal end to a very stupid plan. He died a horrific, painful death, all to save about $5 on a Disneyland ticket. The Space Mountain Body Count. It's a classic, a high-speed indoor roller coaster that whips you through the pitch-black darkness of space. It's also, statistically, one of the deadliest rides in Disneyland history, with at least 5 deaths to its name. Yes, seriously. But these aren't your typical fell-out-of-the-ride stories. These are weirder. Let me explain exactly what happened. In 1979, at Walt Disney World in Florida, A 31-year-old woman named Cheryl got off the ride feeling sick. She couldn't walk, and her husband had to carry her to the first aid station. She died in the hospital a few days later. The cause? Cheryl had an undiagnosed heart tumor the size of a golf ball. The violent shaking and G-forces of Space Mountain caused the tumor to dislodge from her heart. The tumor traveled through her bloodstream, entered her brain, and killed her. I mean, what are the odds? You go on a roller coaster and it literally shakes a tumor loose in your body. It's like a 1 in a billion cosmic level bad luck. Then there's the case of James Higgins. In 1985, at Disneyland in California, James was riding Space Mountain when he was allegedly thrown from his seat during a sharp turn. He fell, struck the track, and his spinal cord was severed. He was instantly paralyzed from the waist down. He survived, but spent the rest of his life in a wheelchair, requiring 24-hour care. He sued Disney, but a jury ruled against him, buying Disney's argument that he must have stood up during the ride. And it gets worse. In 2000, at Tokyo Disneyland, a 9-year-old boy was found unconscious at the end of the ride. He died 3 months later from a congenital heart defect that no one knew he had. And back at Walt Disney World in 2006, a 73-year-old man lost consciousness on the ride and died in the hospital. The cause was, again, a pre-existing heart condition. You know, the thing about Space Mountain is that it's not a flaw in the ride itself that's the problem. It's the perfect storm of darkness, speed, and G-forces that seems to find any hidden weakness in the human body and exploit it. It's a ride that, for a handful of unlucky people across the globe, turned a fun trip to space into a one-way ticket to the morgue. The 8-year death of Brandon Zucker. Roger Rabbit's Cartoon Spin. It's a kid's ride where you get into a 2-person car that spins and moves along a track through dark cartoon scenes. There's a steering wheel in the middle that lets you control how fast you spin. But let's talk about the car's design. There's a lap bar, but no seatbelts. There are no side barriers. And there's a huge cutout on one side for people to get in and out. It's a massive safety gap. On September 22, 2000, 4-year-old Brandon Zucker and his family got in line. Now, Disney had its own safety rule for this ride, and it's critical. The smallest child is supposed to be seated farthest from that giant cutout opening. Brandon was the smallest. He should have been placed on the inside seat. He wasn't. The cast members loaded him right next to the opening. Then came the second mistake. They lowered the lap bar, but according to the official state investigation, it was not fully lowered. There was a gap between the bar and Brandon's small body. A 4-year-old in the seat right next to a giant hole with a loose lap bar. You can see where this is going. The ride started. As the car spun, Brandon was thrown through the gap. He fell onto the track, and the car that had just ejected him rolled over him, folding his small body in half and pinning him underneath. For 10 agonizing minutes, Brandon was trapped. When they finally got him out, he had no pulse and wasn't breathing. The oxygen deprivation caused catastrophic, irreversible brain damage. Brandon Zucker spent the next 8 years in a vegetative state. He couldn't walk, talk, or eat. He was a prisoner in his own body. He died on January 26, 2009, at the age of 13. The Zucker family sued Disneyland, detailing Brandon's horrific injuries, the 8 years of suffering, and the mountain of medical bills. In the face of their own catastrophic negligence, Disney settled for an undisclosed sum. After the incident, the state of California ordered Disney to make major safety changes. They had to install a sensor-equipped guard around the bottom of each car, improve the lap bar design, and completely retrain their staff on loading procedures. It took a 4-year-old being crushed and spending 8 goddamn years in a vegetative state for them to fix a problem they should have seen from a mile away.